Good evening and welcome to tonight's event, Behind the Iron Curtain, New Voices from Eastern Europe, which is a reading and conversation with Romanian-Hungarian writer Attila Bartis and East German writer Clemens Meyer. Delighted that you're all here, that you've given up Bob Dylan, is it Bob Dylan? As well as the Red Sox to come, so very good. So my name is Vivian Schmidt, and I am the Jean Monnet Professor of European Integration and Director of the Center for International Relations at Boston University. Tonight's event is the fifth in the series of conversations with European artists and writers being organized by the Institute for Human Sciences at Boston University in collaboration with the Center for International Relations, the literary journal Agni, the American Literary Translators Association, and Zephyr Press. Previous speakers in the series include German author Bernhard Schlink, the filmmaker Agnes Varda, German-Turkish poet Zafer Senocak, and Romanian poet Liliana Ursu. On Monday, May 4th, so put this in your books, we will host a conversation with the Basque writer Bernardo Atzaga and the Mexican-American intellectual, essayist, lexicographer, and cultural commentator Ilan Stavans. May's event coincides with the release of Agni 69, and we hope to see all of you there. This Eurospective series is funded by the European Commission delegation in Washington, D.C., and we're very grateful, needless to say, for their support for this initiative. I would also like to thank our partners, Agni editors Sven Burkertz and Bill Pierce, Dr. Chandler Rosenberger of our Department of International Relations, and the Institute for Human Sciences manager Elizabeth Amrian, who has orchestrated this series. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by the Center for German and European Studies at Brandeis University and the Goethe Institute in Boston. I want to thank you, and also to Karen Ohlenschläger from the Goethe Institute, and to Sabine von Mering from Brandeis, who will translate for Clemens Meyer this evening. A big thanks to Jill Schoolman of Archipelago Books for introducing us to Attila Bartis, to Tamas Doline, who will translate for Attila, and finally to our moderator Askild Melnichuk. Askild, as many of you know, is the former editor of Agni, which he founded in 1972 as an undergraduate at Antioch College. He is professor of creative writing at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and a member of the core fiction faculty of the graduate Bennington Writers seminars. His third novel, The House of Widows, Grey Wolf Press, won the Editor's Choice Award from the American Library Association of one of the outstanding books of 2008. Askild has previously taught at Harvard University and Boston University, where he edited Agni until its 30th anniversary year in 2002. Askild will introduce our speakers this evening. So, Askild, to you.
Thank you, Vivian. Thanks to Elizabeth also, and a shout out to Irena Grudzinska-Gross, in whose shadow I sit. A few months ago, I gave a talk on translation titled somewhat plaintively, Bitte, ich spreche nur Amerikanisch. Excuse me, I speak only American. And even though that's not quite true, as Ukrainian also seasons my linguistic stew, what I was wondering about then, and have continued thinking about, is what literature and translation offers us. Now, on the one hand, a short list of names should provide about as much of an answer as anyone might need. Cervantes, Balzac, Flaubert, Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, Hamsun, Alain Fournier, Kafka, Kundera, Borges, never mind Homer, Catullus, Dante, and so on. On the other hand, I find anxiety around the subject of translation more pervasive than one might guess. As the owner of a leading literary bookstore, himself a novelist, said to me in passing, "We're afraid we just won't get the references right." Fiction, after all, deals more commonly in particulars than in universals. I know a talented young Sudanese writer who dropped out of a writing class because he simply didn't know what suburbia or over the rainbow signified. Yet some of us persist in reading outside our mother tongue precisely because amid the particulars, we sometimes discover an original vision capable of extending our own optical range. As our sphere of references grows, so does our world. Speaking for myself, I have lately re-immersed in Hermann Broch, the great Austrian refugee, who in the afterword to his last novel, The Guiltless, which looks at the lives of politically indifferent citizens in Austria and Germany in the 30s, observed, "For political indifference is ethical indifference, hence closely related to ethical perversity." And everyone is interested in that. I found sustenance in that notion, which is strongly at odds with the dominant literary tone here. Both of today's writers have that kind of personal vision, capable of dislodging us from our complacency, breaking the iron bonds of intellectual habit. Both, too, put me in mind of this Ars Poetica from Austrian novelist Thomas Bernhardt. We all want to hear something different, worse than what we carry around inside us. That is the main reason we speak to people. So I'm going to introduce Attila and Clemens, and then the format will follow, be a little bit different from what we've done in previous weeks. I'll ask Attila to read a few sentences in Hungarian, then Bill will read a passage in Bill Pierce Vanya will read a passage in English, and then I'll ask Attila some questions while Clemens drums his fingers impatiently, and then I will ask Clemens to read and ask him some questions, and we'll mix it up together and open it out to questions for all of you. Attila Bartis was born in Târgu Mureș, Romania in 1968, and now lives in Budapest. Therein lies a story. On completing a degree in photography, he published his first novel, The Walk, in 1995 to serious acclaim. A book of stories, The Bluish Haze, appeared in 1998. In 2005, he published a book of essays, The Lazarus Apocrypha. Tranquility, from which he will read to us tonight, came out in 2001 in Hungary, receiving a host of awards, including the Sándor Márai Prize. About it, novelist Brian Evanson observed, "It is among the most haunted, most honest, and most human novels I've ever read." The novel, which has also been made into a film, has been published here by the estimable Archipelago Books, and just a few weeks ago it was selected by 3%, one of the country's leading websites dedicated to translations, as the best translated book of 2008. Its translator, not just incidentally, was the venerable Imre Goldstein, who has also carried Peter Nadas and Gorky Conrad over into English. Clemens Meyer was born in Halle, Handel's birthplace, that's right, in what was once known as East Germany in 1977. He currently lives in Leipzig. Like many a writer before him, he did a stint as a manual laborer, working as a construction worker, a furniture removal man, and a security guard before enrolling with the help of scholarships at the German Literature Institute at Leipzig. His first novel, When We Were Dreaming, published in 2006, received the Clemens Brentano Prize, among others, and, by some reports, has already achieved the status of a cult classic. In 2008, he was awarded the Leipzig Book Fair's Prize for Fiction for his collection of stories, The Night, The Lights. The translators for the excerpts he'll be reading from include Katie Derbyshire and Stephen Randall. So at this point, I'm going to ask Attila to read a few sentences in Hungarian, and then Bill. Before you do, maybe I'll just say something about the novel so people have a frame. Tranquility, the novel from which Attila will read, is a novel about Andor, a 36-year-old writer who lives in a small apartment with his mother, formerly a celebrated actress who has descended into a malevolent madness. The book opens with her funeral and then backtracks to give us a close-up of what life for these two has become. Rebecca, Andor's mother, isn't merely a prima donna, but is an incestuous and cruel narcissist. When Andor's sister, a violinist, flees her clutches, mother stages a mock funeral for her daughter, complete with a coffin. Andor strives to escape, but he's caught in a web of filial obligations, slowly strangling him and all his relationships.
Good evening. I will read just a very, very short part in Hungarian from the beginning. Szombat délelőtt 11-kor volt a temetés. Bár jobb szerettem volna várni vele még legalább néhány napot, hát ha megjön Eszter, de felárért sem vállalták tovább a fagyasztást. Valami új szabályzatra hivatkozott a nő az irodában, és kérdezte, hogy miért nem hamvasztatom el. Az olcsóbb is, meg sokkal praktikusabb. Akkor olyan időpontot választhatok, ami mindenkinek megfelel a családban. Amire csak annyit mondtam, hogy nem égettem el az anyámat. Inkább legyen szombaton, és kifizettem a 3 napi tárolást előre, amit számlázott, aztán beírta a szállítók könyvébe, hogy 704 koporsós szombat Kerepesi, majd elém tett valami papírokat, és mutatta a golyóstollal, hogy hol írjam alá. I think that's enough.
I'm going to read from the beginning, and then I'll let you know when I'm skipping forward a little bit and reading a section that Askold, thank you very much, wanted to be able to discuss with Attila afterward. The funeral was at 11 in the morning on Saturday, though I would have liked to have waited a few more days in case Esther showed up, but they wouldn't continue with the refrigeration, not even for extra payment. The woman in the office quoted some new regulation and then asked why not cremate the body. It would be cheaper and much more practical, since I could pick a time convenient for everybody in the family. To which I replied that I would not incinerate my mother, let the funeral be on Saturday, and I paid in advance for the 3 days of storage. She gave me a receipt, entered casket number 704, Saturday, Carapesi Cemetery, into the delivery log, and then put some papers before me, showing with a ballpoint pen where to sign. When the woman suggested cremation, I did waver for a moment because I remembered my mother's hysterical poses. "Look, that's how they all sit up, all of them," she would say, holding on to the chair by her bedside and showing me how corpses sat up in the oven. A few months earlier, she had seen a documentary on the subject, and since then she would mention it almost every morning, and I'd say to her, "Don't worry, Mother, you won't be cremated, and be careful how you spill your tea." But in a few days, she'd start all over again, that cremation was ungodly, and I knew she was afraid there would be no resurrection for cremated people, and that was really something, considering that she had never in her damned life had anything to do with God. Lately, she had demanded I swear she wouldn't wind up in a crematorium. She forbade me to burn her, to which I replied that I'd swear to nothing. And since luckily she was still ambulatory, she could go to the notary's office and get a paper saying it was forbidden to burn her. That shut her up, because for 15 years she'd been too scared to leave the apartment. In short, for a moment I tried to visualize mother sitting up in the oven without holding on to a chair. But then I thought of Esther, who might still come back, because I would have liked her to see the withered body, the nails bitten to the quick on the knobby fingers with the 7 souvenir rings. From the Juliet of the Year souvenir ring, through the Friends of Poetry souvenir ring, all the way to the Moscow Festival souvenir ring, from which the gilding had long peeled off, and depending on whether they were made of copper or aluminum, stained the fingers green or black. I wanted Esther to see the sticky straw blonde hair on which the dye would become smeared more and more unevenly every year, and through which the ashen hue of the head's skin would glow dimly, and the breasts made firm and taut again by rigor mortis, but which, way back then, after barely a month and a half of breastfeeding, she smeared with salt lest the nipples become elongated. But most of all, I would have liked Esther to see the dead countenance, the countenance that was in no way different from the live one, and whose bluish glimmer, as of Saturday morning, would begin to light up the grave that had been waiting empty for 15 years, all because her eyes could not be shut. There was no need for an obituary, because for a decade and a half she had had no acquaintances, and I didn't want anybody except Esther to come to the cemetery. I hate death notices. There were about 30 of them in Mother's desk drawer. They forgot to remove her name from a few mailing lists, and the mailman brought one even the year before last, which she kept reading for days. Poor little Winkler, how cleverly he portrayed Harpagon. Isn't life just awful, even to great actors like him, and there are no exceptions? Terrible, simply terrible. Don't forget, son, today Winkler, tomorrow you. In this, there are no exceptions. Sometimes she would take all the death notices out of the drawer and lay them out on her desktop as if playing solitaire. They were oily from frequent handling, like the cards of fortune-telling gypsy women, But these notices were far more communicative about the exact time and circumstances of death, and things like, with tragic suddenness and after prolonged illness. For hours, Mother would keep arranging the black-margined notices in chronological order or by the age of the deceased, or she would group them according to religious affiliation while sipping her mint tea. On average, Protestants live 6 years fewer than we do. That is not by chance. These things are not a matter of chance, son, she said. You're probably right, Mother, but I must work, I said. And she returned to her room and continued to figure out who would live longer. The previous Sunday, I had traveled to the countryside for a reading engagement. I accepted these invitations not so much for the money as for a change of surroundings. I did the shopping and cooked the food for Mother, and then locked the door on her from the outside. Even after I turned the key for the second time, I heard her, "When are you coming back?" "Soon, Mother. Tomorrow evening the latest. The soup is in the fridge. Don't forget to heat it up and turn off the TV for the night," I said again, this time only to the double-locked door reinforced with a crossbar. And she responded by engaging the security chains, which she did not without reason from her point of view. Just as from her point of view, it made sense that she had her own fire extinguisher, a large variety of disinfectants, and a Wertheim safe. From her point of view, it made sense that she had me open her mail for weeks after she had seen on TV what was left of a prime minister or a mayor when they opened their own letters. "Nothing but shreds, son. They showed the shreds around the desks," she said, and hastened to the safety of the toilet as if entrusting me with opening the envelopes only because she had to pee. And then one night she rapped on my door, stopped at the threshold. She'd never walk into my room when I was at home, and went into her spiel of, "You want to kill me with this cigarette smoke." And I told her I'd air out the place soon, Mother. But she kept standing in the doorway. "What's bothering you, Mother?" I asked. "You know very well what's bothering me. Don't read my letters. This is my life, my own life, which is none of your business. Do you understand?" And I said, "All right, from now on I won't open them. But now, please go to bed. It's 3 o'clock in the morning." And in the last few months, I haven't written her any more letters. I walked to the railway station, barely a 30-minute leisurely stroll, which I needed. I'd always take a walk before going anywhere. Even going to the store, I'd first do a round in the museum garden or just around the block, while preparing myself for sentences that do not end in the word mother. But this is not quite accurate. Not merely for different sentences, I had to prepare for different gestures as well as for a different way of breathing. The first few minutes were always like some kind of no man's land, because for 15 years it was between her "When are you coming back?" and "Where have you been?" that the seasons changed, the Danube overflowed, and a shameful empire fell apart. Everything happened from "When are you coming back?" to "Where have you been?" Brokers of the soul established religions, chartered accountants rewrote the Revelation of St. John, tornadoes were named after female singers, earthquakes after politicians, 15 Nobel Peace Prizes found their laureates, and as many old women managed to escape in a small boat from the last leper colony in the world. Between a single "When are you coming back?" and "Where have you been?" 3 new welfare laws and 300 satellites began to function. In Asia, 3 languages were declared defunct, and in Chile, 3,000 political prisoners were eliminated with the help of a collapsing mine. Between "When are you coming back?" and "Where have you been?" the nearby all-night supermarket went bankrupt, and a cheating tax collector roamed our neighborhood. The former mailman went blind from smuggled vodka made of methyl alcohol, and a burst water main like a geyser spewed up all its muck. But it was also between these 2 questions that our concierge kicked the fetus out of his own daughter's belly, because 14-year-old Emika said she loved the gym teacher with all her heart and wanted no abortion. Her father delivered the first kick when my mother asked, "When are you coming back?" And by the time I got home from being with Esther and lied that I had been to a concert, Emika was already through her first operation. I'm skipping forward now to a shorter section, not too many pages further on. Since I still had about 20 minutes until my connection, I thought I'd work a bit more on my manuscript, but save for a comma here and a word order there, I didn't have much to correct. It was a very simple story about a village priest named Albert Mohos, who, after many years of faithful service, annihilated his entire congregation during a Good Friday Mass with the rat poison he had mixed into the wafers. What I usually do while being introduced by the host, inevitably a literature teacher, a librarian, or some cultural functionary, is scan the audience to pick out a person for whom I would do the reading. Someone I would occasionally look in the eye, who would ask no questions. In short, a person who would not applaud because that was not his or her job. This time, the minute we took our places on the platform, I chose a woman in her 40s sitting near the end of the third row. After the first few sentences, however, I felt like she didn't like my addressing the reading to her. Halfway through the story, she got up and left the hall. She didn't even bother to prevent the floppy seat of her chair from making a racket. From that moment on, I sat on the stage as if in a courtroom, but I did finish the reading, and then tried my best to answer questions about why I write, what my plans were, whether I was content with my accomplishments thus far, or had I expected to achieve more. Because I didn't remember my prepared answers, I had to drink a whole pitcher of water just to gain time to think. Luckily, at such places, there's always a pitcher of water on the table. Then an elderly man asked why I picked a priest as the hero of my story, whether I was angry with the church, and if so, why, because in his view, the church had an important role in today's alienated world. And I had to drink some more water, because I hadn't prepared for this question at all. It didn't occur to me that the Reverend Albert Mohos had anything to do with the church. I'm not angry with the church, I said. I don't really know why I chose a priest as the hero of my story, I said. Maybe because if the hero were a party secretary, this story wouldn't make any sense. We cannot expect a party secretary not to poison the attending members at a party meeting, I said, and then luckily the librarian came to my rescue. This story is really a symbol, Uncle Auntie, only it is written in a very true-to-life form, he said, and then quickly thanked me for having accepted their invitation and wished me continued good work and success. After the reading, the local priest came over to me. He was about 50, a military chaplain type who, if the need arose, would stroll between the trenches under fire as if only the sky were thundering, and who, because of the Lord's infinite benevolence, would only be hit after he had completed his mission. "I've got a pretty good ceremonial wine if you've got the courage to taste it," he said, and took me by the arm, giving me a good excuse to turn down the invitation of the school principal, who must have been designated as my official host by the cultural committee. He was visibly relieved now because he wouldn't have to render an account to a total stranger about the difficulties cropping up in education, and about the excellence of his school despite those difficulties, or about the annual poetry recitals and field trips, and of the countrywide successes of the folk dancing group that celebrates its jubilee this very season. And he wouldn't have to show interest in the difficulties of book publishing. He has enough problems of his own. Only 2 days earlier, his cow dropped its calf prematurely, and every 6 months, as part of the cultural program, they stick him with a writer who, in the best of cases, pukes all over his bathroom and then molests his 16-year-old daughter. And in the worst case, he's silent as the grave, eats his chicken with fork and knife, which means that the whole family has to follow suit, and he, the host, must keep talking, juggling all the words, the cultural program be damned, if only it wouldn't always be so obvious that all these readers, the pukers as well as the silent ones, are hopeless losers, babies blown up into adult size who'd have preferred to remain stuck to their mother's dugs, like this one with his rat-poisoned holy wafers. But what would you do, Mr. Writer, if at pig slaughtering time they handed you the blood bowl to hold, eh? You'd drop it like a hot potato, wouldn't you? About that, Mr. Principal, you are mistaken. I'd just get a better grip on it.
And Attila, this was a wonderful pairing of sections because I think it does give the audience a flavor for the book. There is the dark, the macabre narrative and the tension between the mother and the son, and then there is the dark comedy too. I also, what I loved about this section was that it was so unlike any kind of literary experience I can imagine having here. We wouldn't have a priest in the audience coming up and speaking with you afterwards, for instance. My question, though, is about the history, the role of history, which is subordinated in this novel to the drama between the two main characters between Andor and Rebecca, but it's very present in a lot of ways. One of the reasons that Rebecca has the mad mother, who was a celebrated actress, can't act anymore is in part she's been blacklisted because her daughter has left the country and gone beyond the Iron Curtain. And then there is the fact that the narrator learns later that his father had been an informer, and then there is also the fact that Esther, his lover, has, I think, is a Jewish roots in the deep background. So these things are all sort of far in the background of the characters. And I wonder if you could say something about the way in which you're thinking about the history of these characters shape the characters themselves.
Sorry, but I have to ask
Yes,
to
sure,
translate
absolutely.
felét körülbelül. Unfortunately, my English is very bad, so I...
Wonderful.
That's all right. Azt kérdezte tulajdonképpen, hogy a történelmi hagyományai annak a karaktereknek, akik benne vannak, tehát olyan az őrült anya, mivel hogy azért került, azért nem szerepelhetett többet, mert ugye a férje nyugatra távozott, illetve, vagy a lánya nyugatra távozott, illetve hogy a férje talán besugó volt korábban, és hogy talán valami zsidó kapcsolat is volt, hogy ez valójában hogyan befolyásolja a te személyes élményeid alapján, illetve maga történet alapján, hogy hogyan halad a történet elő. Érthetem a kérdés, amit...
Az a valóság, hogy ez a közeg, vagy ez a család számomra természetes. Tehát ez egy tipikus közép-kelet-európai család.
Igen. So what he's trying to say that this kind of a family is very natural to him, because this, he would say that it represents an average Central European or Eastern European family. So he found this as being a sort of a normality from his standpoint of view.
Sure. I like to say that in the United States or in the West there is neuroses, and in Eastern Europe there's history. So these things kind of come together in the family.
Nyugat-Európában neurózis van, Kelet-Európában meg történelem, hogy ezek így együtt a két dolog együtt.
Igen, ez lehetséges, hogy így van. Hát az a valóság, hogy nem... Tehát a Kelet-Európának a kevertsége az valószínűleg egy picit különbözik mondjuk az Egyesült Államok kevertségétől, tehát hogy egészen más felhangjai vannak ott talán ennek a dolognak.
So he thinks that the melange of the Eastern European society and then the history is probably very different from what it is presented in the United States, and also the meaning of some of these this family situation that he pointed out, or you pointed out actually in your question, is probably have a very different meaning than what it is to hear.
De lehet, hogy ez most egy felelőtlen kijelentés volt, mert Isten igazából nem tudom, hogy az Egyesült Államokban mit jelent.
But he says that it might be an irresponsible statement because he doesn't know what the United States is like. This is his first time here.
I suspect you're right, and so I would actually love to have a little bit more of a context for what is sort of a portrait of the normal Hungarian family.
Beszélnél kicsit többet egy általányos magyar családról, vagy az, hogy milyen is egy...
Konkrétan az én családomra kíváncsi.
Are you interested in his family?
Well, here, let me make the question more concrete. If I have my facts right, as I understand it, your family left Transylvania for Budapest in 1984, and your father, was it Ferenc Bartis, is that yes. Right? Who was a writer and editor, was exiled from Romania, is that right?
Yes.
So I wonder if you could just say a little bit more about that.
Hogy egy kicsit többet mesélnél erről, hogy a ti történetetek gyakorlatilag, hogy Erdélyből átkerültetek Budapestre, és hogy az édesapád gyakorlatilag elüldözték az országból.
Apám 56 után 7 évet töltött börtönben,
So-
Romániában.
After 56, his father spent 7 years in prison in Romania.
Tehát ő egyetemista volt az 56-os budapesti forradalom idején Kolozsváron.
So he was a university student at the time of the Hungarian Revolution in 56, while being in Romania in Cluj and Kolozsvár.
És szervezett egy szimpátia tüntetést, kimentek a Kolozsváron a Házsongárdi temetőbe, ami egy nagyon híres magyar temető Erdélyben.
So he organized a sympathy demonstration in Cluj at the time at a famous Hungarian cemetery.
És akkor ezért először halálra ítélték, utána életfogytiglanra változtatták az ítéletet, és végül 7 év után amnesztiával szabadult.
So he was first sentenced to death and then sentenced to life in prison, and then after 7 years he was released from prison.
Erről a börtönről annyit érdemes tudni, hogy 14-en voltak egy cellában, és 3-an maradtak életben.
So something to know about this prison, that there were 14 prisoners in the same cell and only 3 of them remained alive.
Tehát ebből a börtönből nem igazán lehet kiszabadulni, még akkor se, hogyha kiengedik az embert.
So it's almost impossible to leave this prison even if they let you go.
Tehát ez azt jelenti, hogy attól kezdve ebben a cellában töltöd az életed. Apám ebben a cellában töltötte az életét 2006-ig, amíg rákban meg nem halt.
So basically he says that his father spent all the rest of his life up till 2006 when he died in this cell.
És ezt nagyon sok szempontból nagyon-nagyon nehéz volt megérteni, hogy ő miért is látja egészen másképpen a világot, mint én. De hála jó Istennek talán sikerült megértenem.
So it was very difficult for him to understand how he's viewing the world, and because of his experience, for him personally, and probably he came to a resolution in the end, and now he probably has an understanding what the way he viewed life.
Ő egy úgymond színmagyar székelyföldi családból származott, ellentétben édesanyámmal. Édesanyám egy félig román, félig magyar családból származott, Isten igazából egy elrománosodott orosz családból.
So his father is pure ethnic Hungarian, and his mom was partially Romanian, or even a Russian component that lived in Romania, and then partially Hungarian, which is, knowing the Eastern European, the Central European context is very important. Ethnic background is very important for each and every family.
Anyám 83-ban halt meg, apámmal kettesben 84-ben költöztünk át Erdélyből Budapestre.
So his mom died in 83, and his dad and him moved to Hungary in 84.
Ez egy azért fontos adalék, mert elég sok félreértés történt. Voltak, akik önéletrajzi regényként értelmezték ezt a könyvet, és erről mindenkit lebeszélnénk.
So this is important to point out, because many people, some of the readers, thought that this was a autobiography, which is not, and then he would like to state that it is not.
És hát 84-ben úgy költöztünk át Budapestre. Isten igazából felajánlották, hogy hagyjuk el az országot, apámnak akkor jó esélyei voltak rá, hogy újra visszakerüljön a börtönbe.
So basically in 84 they were suggested or told to leave the country because his father was up for another imprisonment.
És akkor úgy jöttünk el az országból, hogy megfosztottak a román állampolgárságtól, ami azt jelentette, hogy egészen a rendszerváltásig 90-ig nem is mehettünk haza Erdélybe.
And when they left the country, they lost their Romanian citizenship, so they were not able to return until 1990 to Romania.
Tehát ez azt jelentette, hogy a Budapesten töltött életemnek az első 6 esztendeje az Isten igazából kényszerlakhely.
So the first 6 years living in Budapest was a situation where I was forced to live in a different country.
Tehát Isten igazából 90 januárjától volt esélyem arra, hogy Budapestet valamennyire is az otthonomnak tudjam tekinteni.
And from 1990 I could accept that Hungary being my home, and Budapest.
So was Romanian your first language and then Hungarian, or was Hungarian your...
Nem.
A román vagy a magyar volt az anyanyelv.
Tehát, hogy én Marosvásárhelyen születtem, ami hát azóta már felborult az arány, de akkor ilyen 60%-a volt körülbelül magyar a lakosságnak, színmagyar családból, már az anyai keveréket leszámítva, tehát magyar volt az anyanyelve.
So Hungarian is his native language, and then where he grew up, Marosvásárhely, that was the Romanian name there for something? Târgu-Mureș. And at the time, it was majority Hungarian-speaking city, about 60%. But as he said, he's coming from a sort of a mixed background. But Hungarian was his native tongue.
And so was the transition for your family for your father and you, an easy adjustment? Or did he wind up working again as a writer and editor, or was it a different kind of life in Budapest?
Hogy a budapesti élet az mennyire volt más, vagy hogy sikerült neki beilleszkedni, édesapádnak beilleszkedni, Magyarországon tudott újra írni? Vagy?
Nagyon furcsa az erdélyi magyarok sorsa ilyen szempontból, és az érzelemvilága.
It is quite complex and complicated what Transylvanian Hungarians feel like, and then what their relationship is to the country. Tehát
Romániában egy igen erőteljesen megkülönböztetett kisebbségnek számítottunk.
So in Romania they were a minority that is secluded.
Ami talán az utóbbi időben esély van rá, hogy elkezdjen változni, de ezt majd még meglátjuk.
This is probably changing nowadays, but we'll see. There's no determination of that.
Magyarországon pedig gyökeresen különbözött az erdélyiek megítéltetése 90 előtt és 90 után.
So in Hungary, the general opinion about Transylvanian Hungarians has significantly changed before 1990 and after 1990.
Tehát 90 előtt gyakorlatilag úgy tekintettek az erdélyire, mint állatkerti nemes vadra.
So before 1990, he says that the Hungarians looked at Transylvanians as some kind of a zoo animal.
Tehát tőlem Budapesten a gimnáziumban a magyar tanárom kérdezte meg, hogy hol tanultam meg ilyen szépen magyarul.
So when he was in Budapest in high school, his teacher asked him, "Where did you learn Hungarian?"
Mert fogalma nem volt arról, hogy Magyarország határától keletre Erdélyben több mint 2 millió magyar él.
Because the teacher didn't know that outside of Hungary, east from Hungary, there are 2 million Hungarians living.
90 után ez a helyzet gyökeresen megváltozott Magyarországon, tehát gyakorlatilag az erdélyi az a bevándorló fekete munkást jelentette.
So
nagyon nagy mértékben.
It has significantly changed after 1990, but it was some kind of a black worker coming into Hungary, and then a lot of people identified them that way.
De a kérdéshez visszatérve, igen, gyakorlatilag beilleszkedett a budapesti életbe, de lelkileg nem.
So back to your question, yes, he integrated into the society, but not in his soul.
Tehát lapot alapított, könyveket adott ki, stb., de ez nem vált az otthonában.
He started a journal, he published books, but his real soul hasn't remained the same.
Was your background an impediment? Did it make it difficult to work as a writer and editor?
Hogy a háttered, vagy honnan jössz, az neked befolyásolta, hogy itt író lehess, vagy ez segítette, vagy nem segítette?
Hát, hogy befolyásolta valamilyen módon, az egészen biztos.
It has definitely influenced his life.
De hogy konkrétan hogyan, miben, miként, azt elég nehéz lenne kidekázni.
But it's very difficult to say how exactly, in details.
Tehát természetesen nem mindegy, hogy az ember már óvodás korában megtanulja az írógépről a nyomtatott betűket, vagy sem, de ettől még senki nem lett író.
So it is one thing that you learn on the keyboard of a typewriter what the letters are, but no one became a writer just seeing that.
Just two more questions, and we want to bring Clemens in. So, given that sort of dual genealogy, what was it that you were reading and what was influencing you as a young man that began to prompt you in your own work?
Ugye, ez a kettős eredetet, mi volt az irodalom, amit először olvastál, ami segített abban, hogy te íróvá válhass?
I can pour more water.
Még vizet.
Egészen biztos vagyok benne, hogy nem ismeri Kemény István verseit, sajnos. Kemény István versei segítettek abba, hogy ne legyek rossz költő.
So he says that most likely you don't know the poet who he loves the most, István Kemény, and his poems encourage him not to be a bad poet. Not to become a bad poet.
That's always good advice. Is there something you might say about him, though, that would give us a feel for who he was? You know, one kind of quality that characterizes him?
Mondanál valamit róla, hogy milyen karakter jelei voltak, vagy mi volt a jellegzetes az ő írásaiban, hogy amit téged befolyás?
Él még, hála jó Istennek, valószínűleg az egyik legnagyobb élő magyar költő. Sajnos a magyar költészetet nagyon-nagyon nehéz fordítani.
It's very hard to translate Hungarian poetry.
De higgy el nekem, vakon,
But
egy
trust me,
nagyon
he's a very big poet, great poet.
Great, I trust you.
Komolyra fordítva és visszatérve, nagyon nehéz megmondani azt, hogy Isten igazából kihatott az emberre.
I think it's very difficult to tell who influenced somebody's.
Tehát valószínűleg tartom, hogy ezt egy irodalmár sokkal pontosabban ki tudja mutatni,
So probably
maga a szerző.
a literary professional can indicate that much better than the author itself.
Sure.
De Dostoyevskit nem tagadhatom le.
But I love Dostoyevsky.
Relieved to hear that. Last question before I ask Clemens to read. So your first book, Asceta, The Walk, took you 6 years to write. What were you doing in that time? I think you studied photography as a student, and so were you writing in that period, or were you?
Tehát az első 6 év, amikor az első könyvedet megírtad, hogy ő úgy tudja, hogy akkor fotót tanultál, vagy fotózást tanultál, hogy mit csináltál abban az időszakban?
Regényt írtam.
He was writing a novel.
What's the relationship between the two?
Mi a fotó és az írás között a kapcsolat?
Tehát én annak idején még Erdélyben képzőművészetet tanultam.
At the time in Transylvania he studied art.
Tehát egy vizualitásnak, valamilyen vizuális kifejezésmódra mindig nagyon nagy szükségem volt.
So he always needed some kind of a visual experience and self-expression.
Nagyon szoros kapcsolat van a kettő között, de hát ennek van egy része, ami kifele látható is.
So that he thinks there is a strong correlate between the two, and then sometimes it's clearly visible.
A sétának van egy szereplője, egy öreg fényképész, Engelhartnak hívják.
So there is an old photographer in his first book, Engelhart, that's his name is.
És hát miután befejeztem a regényt, nagyon sokat kínlottam a fotográfiával, és egyszerűen nem találtam a nyelvem, tehát a fotográfusi nyelvem.
After he finished the book, he struggled with photography and he could not find his own expression, his language of photography anymore.
És akkor elkezdtem egy portrésorozatot készíteni, amiről csak később én magam jöttem rá, hogy gyakorlatilag a regényben szereplő fotográfus képeit készítem el.
And then he started to take pictures of portrait pictures, and then he later realized that were exactly the pictures that the photographer would have taken in the book as a representation of his.
Tehát van
So there is
ilyen
interrelation
átjátszás
between the two.
kettő között.
Yeah, I can certainly see that because Tranquility is a very visual book full of set pieces that are really striking. And maybe somebody in the audience will re-ask my question about the family, because just in case you haven't had a chance to read Tranquility, if Attila really says this is a representative Romanian-Hungarian family, there's incest and suicide, and we may want to revisit this.
Majd még fogunk biztosak kérdezni a közönség is, mert hogy nagyon vizuálisak a képek, amik a könyvben, nyugalomban vannak.
So thank you. So Clemens, thank you for your patience. And I'm going to ask Clemens to read a few paragraphs in German from his first book, his novel, When We Were Dreaming. It's the story of a group of working class kids trying to find their place under the sun in Leipzig right after the fall of the Berlin Wall and the communist regime in the late 80s. It's narrated by one of the boys, Daniel Lenz. While we see the boys sliding into petty criminality, they're not really criminals yet, certainly not compared to the hardened skinheads, as will become clear after this excerpt about their efforts to get to the city to see their beloved soccer team. That's the excerpt that Bill will read.
Thank you. Yes, I read the first few paragraphs of the chapter Schüsse. In this chapter, he called it the Daniel Lenz, the person who speaks, the I in the book, and his friend Rico go to a soccer club. And it's a soccer club in Leipzig. It's a famous soccer club. They've been two-time champions in 1964 and in 1951, it's long ago. And now today they are in the 4th league, and next year they have to go to the 5th league. And this club is called BSG Chemie Leipzig, and in the translation they are called the Chemicals, but the original name is BSG Chemie Leipzig. And now I start. Schüsse. Wir kamen zu spät zur Chemie, Rico und ich, an diesem Sonntag im Jahr nach der Wende, als wir gegen den BFC Dynamo spielten. Es war die letzte Saison der DDR-Oberliga, obwohl es die DDR nicht mehr gab. Auch die BSG Chemie Leipzig gab es nicht mehr. Wir hießen jetzt FC Sachsen Leipzig und ein paar Monate zuvor hießen wir für kurze Zeit FC Grün-Weiß Leipzig. Warum das alles so war, verstanden wir nicht. Wir glaubten an Chemie und wir waren Chemie für immer. Der BFC hieß jetzt auch nicht mehr BFC, sondern FC Berlin, aber das war uns egal, wir hassten ihn trotzdem. Wir kamen zu spät nach Leutsch an diesem Tag, denn meine Eltern hatten sich gerade erst scheiden lassen. Vater wohnte jetzt woanders und jeden zweiten Samstag ging ich mit ihm in die Silberhöhe Mittagessen. Und auch an diesem Sonntag saß ich mit ihm in der Kneipe und blickte auf meine Armbanduhr unterm Tisch, damit er es nicht sehen konnte, denn gegen 1 wollte ich mich mit Rico an der Ecke treffen. So, please.
So it's strange to have the same voice reading these two very different writers, but here we go. I'll try to adjust. Shots. We got to the Chemicals game too late, Rico and I, on that Sunday in the year after the change when we were playing against the Berlin football club BFC Dynamo. It was the last year of the DDR Major League, although the DDR no longer existed. The Leipzig Chemicals no longer existed either. Now we're called the Leipzig Sachsen Football Club, soccer team. And for a few months before that, we were called the Leipzig Green-White Football Club. We didn't understand all that. We believed in the chemicals. We were the chemicals forever. The BFC was also no longer called the BFC, but instead the Berlin FC. But that didn't matter to us. We hated them just as much. That day we arrived at the Leutsch Stadium too late because my parents had just gotten divorced. Father was living somewhere else. And every other Saturday I went with him to the Silberhohe, the bar, to eat lunch. And on that day, too, I sat with him in the bar and looked at my watch under the table so he couldn't see, because at about 1 o'clock I was supposed to meet Rico at the corner. "Come with us, Papa," I said, "like the last time we played the Berlin Swine." "Nah," he said, and smiled and knocked his schnapps back. "Even if we're playing the Stasi Schwein, I will never go to Leutsch again. That's all over with for me now, boy." Father drank quite a lot when I went to lunch with him. Actually, he drank all the time while I ate, and when the chemicals were playing and he didn't want to come along and stayed sitting at the table alone, when I took out my green and white scarf and left, he drank even more. "Berlin Swine," he said as I was putting on my green and white scarf, because it was already after 1 o'clock. "Wipe them out. They've betrayed us for years, year after year. And Danny, say hello to Leutsch for me." I sat down again and told him about what was new with the chemicals. And there was quite a bit. Players, management, jerseys. We even have a new name. And for that reason, I came too late to meet Rico, who'd already waited a long time at the corner and was a little mad because he'd watched the 112 tram go off over the bridge, and the next one didn't come for another 20 minutes. "We're going to get there at least a quarter of an hour late," Rico said, while we were finally traveling toward the central rail station. "You know how much can happen in that time?" "Sure," I said. 1-0 for us, 2-0 for them. You never know in advance." "Did you have to sit with your old man and watch him drink?" "Yeah," I said, "I had to." I leaned on the windowsill and looked out at the old factories in the East Side industrial area where we were now stopping. "Danny, I didn't mean to say it that way, you know." For almost 2 years, Rico had been living with his grandmother, and he had held a grudge against his father ever since he took off, but he also held a grudge against his mother, because at that time she could no longer handle him. He had something against all kinds of people, and that was why he liked going to chemicals games, because there everyone had something against the others, especially if they came from Berlin. Rico pulled on his green and white scarf and pushed it around and wound one end around his hand. "What do you think, Danny? Will we still manage to get into first place?" "I don't know. I don't think so. We're 8 points out of second place. And last week against Dresden, I mean?" "You're right. 7-0. 7-0 right on the snout. We have only a little, well, you know, first wouldn't be bad, but second in the Federal League, that'd be pretty great too. In the Major League, Danny, the Federal League, we'd have only a little dreamed," I said, and we laughed. It got dark in our compartment because we were going through the little tunnel. "Federal League," Rico shouted right next to my ear, and I jumped. "Stop that shit, man. You were scared, huh?" "No, not at all. I just felt like standing up." We came into the station, and Rico glanced at his watch. 20 minutes, Danny. If we run, we can be at the stadium in 20 minutes. Hey, you want to go or not?" "I just want to look out a minute." I walked down the corridor toward the door. The tram jolted a few times. I stumbled through the corridor and hung onto one of the handles as the tram screeched to a halt. Outside, I heard voices coming over the loudspeakers. "Arrival, track 22, continuing via at 142. Express, Hallsaal Central. Track 19. Leutsch Station." I pulled on the door release. It was jammed, and Rico pushed me aside and wrenched the door open. You've got no juice, Danny." "Of course I've got juice." I gave him a shove, and he jumped out onto the platform. "Hey," he said, "here come some people." "Natch," I said, "we're in the station." "Just look a minute." But before I could look, I already heard them. "Berlin, Berlin, we come from Berlin." Many voices still far away, but they were coming closer. "Berlin, Berlin, we come from Berlin." "Shit, Danny, shit, now look at them." I moved onto the car's galvanized doorstep and leaned out, and then I saw them. "Hurrah, hurrah, the BFC is here. Hurrah, hurrah, the BFC is here." 100, maybe 150. No, there must have been more. The whole lobby was full of them, and the first of them were already on the platform. "Hurrah, hurrah, Berlin, Berlin, we come from Berlin." Loads of wine-red scarves, bloodhounds, my father had called them once. I could already see the first of these guys, skinheads, huge skinheads, were in the van. "Shit," Rico said, and I clung to the railing. "BFC swine." He stepped backwards, stumbled, and leaned against the tram next to me. "Danny," he whispered. Danny, now we're in deep shit. He climbed back onto the doorstep. I saw how his legs were shaking, but I couldn't feel my own legs anymore. Chemical swine out! Chemical swine out! The scarves, Rico, our scarves. I grabbed him by the shoulders and shook him. Rico, man, Rico, we've got to get out of here. But Rico just sat down on the bottom step. Chemical swine out! Chemical swine out! Their voices echoed under the big dome of the station. I wanted to get away, back into the tram and further forward, and then out somewhere over the tracks. But Rico, then he suddenly jumped up. Shit-eating BFC swine! Goddamn shitty Stasi club! He shoved me back into the tram and slammed the door behind him. He was Rico again, the best welterweight in the city, under 15 class, as he called himself. And we believed him, and everyone who'd seen him in the ring believed him, and I still believe it. Let's go, toward the front, scarves off, put your scarf away. He'd already stuffed his scarf under his jacket and pulled and tugged at mine, but I'd wound it around my neck twice because it was so long. Rico ran off and pulled me by my scarf behind him. I ran as fast as I could through the corridor, but Rico ran faster, and the scarf was like a noose around my neck. I couldn't breathe, but finally I got it off, and Rico stuffed it under his jacket. I heard the door behind us open. We don't want any chemical swine. We ran farther forward. Through the window, I saw the mob alongside on the platform. I saw a man in one compartment stuffing a green and white cap in the wastebasket. And then we were in the front part of the tram, right behind the locomotive. Rico ripped open the door to the toilet, and then we stood in front of the wash basin, in which 3 beer bottles lay, and held our breath and saw our pale faces in the mirror. Rico locked the door. Leave it open, I whispered. Better leave it open. Are you stupid? No, then they'll think it's empty, you know, the way we do when we don't have tickets. Forget it, Danny. These guys are not conductors. I'm not letting those animals in here. They'd beat the hell out of us. But we're still kids, Rico. In the mirror, I was smiling. Looked bad. Maybe you are, Danny, but they don't give a shit. They'll slug us a couple times all the same. What if they find us in here? They won't find us, will they, Rico? Dunno. I squatted next to the wash basin, and Rico leaned with his back against the door. The toilet stank like hell. Somebody had shat all over it and not flushed, but we couldn't do anything about that because flushing made so much noise. We heard the mob rampaging through the tram. Fear and terror, BFC, fear and terror, BFC. And I was really scared. And Rico must have been scared too, even if he was the best welterweight in the city, under 15 class, because there were no chemicals fans here to protect us, no fence and no policemen to keep the Berlin swine away from us, as they did in the stadium. And we'd heard stories about the tough BFC fans. People called them hooligans. Father had told me a lot about them. And he'd also told me that they ruled in every soccer stadium in the whole country, except in Leipzig, where the chemicals played. But we weren't yet in Leipzig. The tram jolted a couple of times, then slowly started moving forward. Rico looked at his watch. 5 minutes too late, he whispered. The damn Berlin swine. The bellowing started again, as if it had stopped. And very close to us, we heard something crash. We're going to destroy Leutsch! We're going to destroy Leutsch! Only a Leutscher is a Deutscher, whispered Rico, and made a fist. Yeah, I said. Yeah, but what are we going to do now? Dunno, Danny. He slowly slid down the door until he was squatting beside me. In a few minutes we'll be there, Danny, and then we'll wait until they're all out. And then we'll somehow sneak into the stadium to our bleachers on the embankment. But I knew that things would go otherwise, because we heard a crash again, this time right in front of the door. Steps, voices. Somebody rattled the door handle. Hey, man, open the goddamn door or I'll piss right here in the corridor. We jumped up. Rico took a beer bottle out of the wash basin. Stay cool, pal, he shouted. Just stay cool. We'll be right out. He took the scarves out of his jacket, stepped on the foot pedal, and flushed the scarves down the toilet full of shit. Rico, no. I grabbed at my scarf. My father had given it to me, but it was too late. It disappeared down the hole. And for a second, I saw the swelling of the tracks below us before the hole closed again. Let's go. Grab a bottle, Danny. Shit, Rico, we don't have a chance. We're Berlin swine, man. We're Berlin swine, Danny. He put a bottle in my hand, then went to the door. No, Rico, please don't open it. Maybe he'll really piss in the corridor and then leave. They'll break the door down, Danny. I stood directly behind him. He unlocked the door and then opened it. There you go, pal. It's all yours. And he was right. The guy would have broken the door down, and he wouldn't even have needed his 2 fists to do it. He had a head like a garbage pail with no hair on it. Careful, pal, Rico said, and waved his beer bottle. Some chemical swine shat all over the toilet. The giant grinned for a second, then shoved us into the corridor and slammed the door behind him. "See," Rico whispered, "it works." I nodded and looked at his back and heard the voices and shouting and the clinking of bottles coming from the car in front of us. The corridor was empty. I looked at the window. We were passing through Mürkon. The tram was slowing down. "Now," I said, "now we can still get out." But I knew that Rico didn't want to get out, even if he was scared, just as I was, even though he was the best welterweight in the city. "Nope," Rico said, "nope, not now. Think of our scarves. We'll see it through. We're going to get to Leutsch. We're not giving up. We're getting into the stadium, into Leutsch, Danny. Shit on the BFC." The toilet door opened. The giant was fiddling with his belt. Then he shoved us aside and went weaving down the corridor to the next car. Glass crunched under his feet, clear glass from the compartment door window mixed with green and brown shards of beer bottles. "Listen, boys." The giant stopped and turned around. "Come on in. It's better to stay together because of the cops and so on. It's better." He mumbled. I hardly understood him, and his huge head wagged as he spoke. "Have to stay together. Have to take care of you boys. All together for the BFC. All together for the BFC." "Sure," Rico said. "All together. All for the BFC." The tram stopped right in front of the window. I saw a big sign, Mürkon. Rico stepped behind the giant. "Let's go. Come on, Danny." The tram started up again, and the sign disappeared. The giant yanked the compartment door open. A few glass shards fell out of his bomber jacket, and then we were standing in the middle of the BFC swine and holding our empty beer bottles tightly with both hands.
That certainly captures a singular and forceful spirit. And I read that you were born in Halle, but you grew up and lived most of your life in East Leipzig. And you once wrote that you believed you could write your way out of it. Have you? Do you still want to?
Now I'm here in Boston. It's a sign, but I don't know if I said it that I want to write my way out of it. Maybe I said it. I'm sure I said it, but it's some years ago, and some years I had the idea to earn much money with this writing, and then to leave this neighborhood and to buy me a flat in Berlin or in the center of my city. But now I have learned that I can live there, and that maybe I have to stay there because it's my gold mine, where where I find all the stories, where I know the people. When I open my window, im Erdgeschoss, was heißt das? Ground floor. I'm living in the ground floor, and so when I open the window, I'm down to earth, and I can see all the people. And it's this neighborhood I am living in is yes, you could say there are people living with social problems. Some of the houses are half empty, and yes, there is a big alcoholism problem. I think there is a gas station nearby, and all the nights people are going mein Fenster vorbei.
Oh, they along the window?
My people are going along and they yes, they want to buy a couple of beers or schnapps or so. So I gave you can write your way out in another way, you know, but you have not to leave. You can stay there, and yes.
Yeah, great, wonderful. Perhaps I'm mistaken, but I read that your father was a medical orderly with a passion for literature who had a huge library. And I wonder where he got his hunger for reading first, and then what it was that he passed on to you through that.
Das in mir erweckt hat.
Woher hat der Vater seine große Begeisterung für die Literatur und was hat an sie?
Yeah. Yes, my father liked literature all his life. He comes from a little village on the coast of the Baltic Sea, and then he came to Leipzig, and he's working. What's the name in English? What you said? In medical.
A medical orderly.
Yes. It's medical orderly.
Was ist auf Deutsch?
Krankenpfleger.
Yeah, like a nurse.
Like a nurse.
My father is no nurse.
A medical orderly.
Yes,
I
okay.
rest my case.
Yes, I know what you mean. And it was in the German Democratic Republic. A lot of people were reading. Maybe was heißt Bauarbeiter? Construction workers were reading. Nurses were reading, and Verkäufer. Salespeople were reading, and not only people who came from university or who had a high school or so much in this kind. People were reading because that was a window out of the country. You could go to all the countries around the world, and our writers, some writers from the Eastern Germany, they found a special way to criticize the. Ich will es nicht Regime sagen, aber die Regierung. The government. This kind of regime there was. They found a way to criticize between the lines. You know what? Between the lines,
sure.
and so people were reading, and there's a new book from Christoph Hein or so, and let's have a look how he can manage it to censor the census, to how he can beat the census. So, and it was a great interest in literature in the Eastern Germany, and so my father did so, and I grew up seeing how he was reading all the days and all the weekends, and so when I was young, I had my own hunger for literature.
Yeah, no, that's wonderful, and I can certainly well imagine that. It sounds also like a writer's paradise.
Yes, I'm not sure.
What's the other side? The other side of it, of course, is the censorship, and
Yes.
were there? How has that changed since reunification?
You mean the interesting in reading, or
Yes.
what? Yes, it's on a lower level, I think now, of course, but that's normal. I have the luck to live in the city of Leipzig, and Berlin is. I go by train 1 hour 10 minutes, and then I'm in the center of Berlin, and so these both cities are cities where culture and literature is on a higher level than in other cities. So in Leipzig, a lot of writers are living in Leipzig, a lot of writers are living in Berlin. But this hunger for literature is gone in a way. Construction workers with big bibliotheks, libraries at home. It's no, these times are changed. But in Germany is a country where many people are reading, where the literature is on a high level, I would say.
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, certainly Berlin has this daunting reputation for all of us here. We're aware that, at least until recently, Berlin had something like a $700 million arts budget compared to, say, the United States.
$700 million?
This is what I had read.
$700 million.
I may be wrong. Somebody can
yes,
Google this.
No,
and check.
maybe when you read it,
if it's on Google.
Yes, it's a capital. Maybe they have a lot of money.
I was going to say I compare that to the United States having a $170 million budget for the whole country. What do you make of that? That people, given more freedom, choose not to read? What does that say about literature? Does it say anything?
I'm not sure if if that's the way it works when you see this problem from this side. Freedom is always a good thing, but there an Eastern German writer said, I forget the name, maybe it was Christa Wolf or another one. I forget the name. He said that there was a special art in beating the censorship. This is a special art to write between the lines, and that is gone. But you can't say, oh, it's sad that it's gone, because it's good that it's gone. Because it's good, you never have to beat the censor anymore. But yes, it's the times are changing. That's
Sure.
history goes. It's normal. So maybe some people have a look back and say, oh yes, at the good old times, but that's normal. Yes, there are always good and bad sides, even in a kind of regime. There are a lot of people in the Eastern Germany have a look back and say, oh yes, it was good times. I had work, I had my family, I had a little bit money. And only not all the people had their battles with the government, but that's not the way it works. It's good that it's all over, and
Sure,
I'm sure about this.
Sure. No, of course, there's no.
Yes.
Sure. No, there's no sentimentalizing tyranny and repression. There is though, a kind of curiosity about. Well, I'm curious about what books brought air into the room, or do you remember specific books that you or your father read and said, oh, this is useful for me to see and know, and this is different from what I see around me daily?
Yes. For example, my father had a lot of the American writers, and he had Saul Bellow and John Updike and the modern classics from the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and yes, I think these books and this were my literary nicht Vorbilder, aber so models. Yes, also I liked the American writers. Even when I was a child, I started my experiences in literature with reading Cooper, and then came.
It's more than I have done.
Raymond Chandler. For example, Raymond Chandler is one of my all-time greats, and Hemingway, and so the list goes on. Norman Mailer and Saul Bellow. Yes.
Do you know that this is Saul Bellow spent the last 20 years of his life teaching at this university?
Oh no! Yes, maybe he sat here on the same stool.
May well.
Yes, I like his novel Herzog.
Herzog, yeah, wonderful.
Yeah, yes, my father read it in. I think it's from the 70s, or isn't
yes,
it?
Yes, right.
And so my father had it, and and later when I was old enough, maybe 16 or 17, I did read it.
If I am crazy, it's all right with me, said Moses Herzog, right? The way it begins.
Yes.
There's. You said you spent 5 years working on When We Were Dreaming.
6 years.
6 years.
Even,
So
yes.
the two of you, this is the average.
I heard that Attila Bartis worked 6 years in his first book. Yes. And so I said, yes, I did the same way. I was working 6 years, from 1999 to 2005, on this novel.
And was this while you were going to school, or were also doing the manual labor stint?
Was haben Sie zu der Zeit gemacht? Waren Sie schon
Yeah.
in der Schule?
When I did my high school, also ich habe einen Abschluss. Diploma, ja. Also Abitur.
High School Diploma.
high school diploma, yeah. And then after this, I never want to go back to school. I said, no, this time is over. I never want to have a teacher who can say me what I have to do. And so I hated it so much, and I never wanted to go to university. And I started to work as a construction worker for 2 years, and then my back get a little bit of trouble, and so I changed, and I was a security man for 1 year. And I did not really what to do. In this time I was writing, but it's not this novel. I had a talent also I started to write little poems, little stories. Anyway, and then I heard about an institute. It's part of the university in Leipzig, an institute for literature. And you have to apply. You have to apply there with own writings. You have to send their own writings. I think 20 pages or so. And I said, yeah, I can try it. And I sent my 20 pages there. And there is a kind of jury, and they have a look at it, and then they say, yes, this is a talented writer or not, or maybe he has an own sound. And so they decide. There are a number of hundreds, 200 or 300 applicants per year, and only 10% or so are taken or are accepted. Yes, that's it. And so I had the luck. Yes, I had the luck. I was one of them, and so I started to study there the art of literature. It's not that I learned how to write there, but there were German writers as teachers, and we wrote together, we read together, and we spoke about literature. And this I did for 4 years, but I have to earn money in this time, so I went on working, and the third thing I was doing is writing this novel, and so it took me about 6 years.
Well, I think that if it makes you feel any better or prouder, in the University of Iowa did a study saying that the average length for the first novel in the United States is 10 years. So we are slower in this and many other things, perhaps.
Yes.
In your story, A Trip to the River, the narrator is in a kind of jail where his cellmate is a former boxer, and he's a very touching figure. I was wondering where that character came from.
I am wondering too. This is the story Trip to the River. This is a story out of my new book, and in 3 weeks I travel to New York, and I will meet there. I'm invited to a literature festival, and will meet there some 1 or 2 publishers who are interested. I hope this new book is soon can soon be read in American. And yes, this boxer.
So is that how? Do your characters appear for you on the page?
It's what does it mean appear for you on the page? So no. Okay. It's I think it's in sometimes I think when ich alles verrate.
If I reveal everything.
I reveal everything. Where does the people come from? Are they pure fiction, or are these people from my living, from my neighborhood? Or is it 50-50 or 30-70%?
Sure.
So when I reveal all of it, the magic is gone.
Right. Well.
So maybe there is a boxer in my neighborhood, and maybe in most times most it's a mix. This person, I would say, this person is 20% cis men, 10% cis men from my neighborhood, 5% from cis men I know, and about 53% pure fiction.
Sure, absolutely, absolutely. Great. What I want to do now is actually ask both of you some kind of broader questions, and then maybe bring the audience into it. Here, I see two gifted, brilliant, talented young men who are
thank you.
surrendering their life to a kind of eccentric, almost archival profession in the 21st century. And I was wondering what it is you think that fiction is able to offer us in our interlinked, internet-ridden world. What is fiction, what do you think fiction particularly offers?
Az internet világában a fikció, az írás mit tud nyújtani a közönségnek? Tough question.
Any takers from the audience? No.
What? Yes. Is it?
Attila?
Yes, please.
Attila, hogy kezdjed te, azt mondja.
Hát az a valóság, hogy nem tudom. Tehát valószínűleg tartom, hogy ugyanannyit tud adni, mint Homérosz világába, vagy Dante világába, vagy Shakespeare világába. Nem hiszem, hogy internetfüggő lenne az irodalomnak a szerepe az ember életében.
He thinks, or he says he doesn't know. And he says he doesn't think that the role of literature or fiction has changed in a person's life or in the world since Homer, and it probably offers just as much as, or it doesn't offer anything at all. Since he said the other thing is he said that just because there is internet, it doesn't make a difference in terms of how it gets appreciated.
Is there anything more particular you want to say about what, in fact, it does do for the reader?
Esetleg, hogy van-e valami olyan pozitívum, amit most tud adni a fikció a közönségnek, azon kívül, amit mindig is adott, valami plusz újdonság.
Ezen még gondolkodom.
He's thinking about it, and Clemens.
Yes, I see it in a similar way. 3 or 4 weeks ago, some people said to me that the fictional writing, it's similar to the philosophies. It's you do the same, but the philosophies do it in a theoretic way, and the belletristics, fiction writers are telling stories, but the stories are about living and dying and love and so all the big things, and I think yes, I think that people need this because not all the people can read the philosophies. So you need good writers who tell you good stories, and in these stories you have all the big questions, maybe no answers or only a little bit about the living in every century, not only in the 21s. It was yes, like he said, since Homer.
Well, it's interesting. The American novelist John Gardner described fiction as an ancient mode of thought, that through storytelling it is a way of thinking, philosophizing. But I have a follow-up question that in Testaments Betrayed, Milan Kundera proposes a more specific sort of history for fiction and a more specific role.
specifikus szerep.
He says that fiction is essentially an invention of the Enlightenment, which allowed individuals to spend time with the discrete consciousness of another individual, thereby developing their individuality, as opposed to a period when everybody read the same religious texts. So that the whole act of reading fiction helped in the development, in the sort of, he specifically speaks in the European context, in the development of the idea of the individual, because of the way in which it reflected an individual's self-awareness, allowing you then to go ahead and see in that mirror what someone else was thinking and add your layer of ideas to that. Does that make any sense?
Azt mondja, hogy úgymond Kundera szerint, hogy a felvilágosodás egy új szerepe van a fikciónak, az hogy az interpersonális kommunikációt, illetve az egyéni véleményt fejezze ki, tehát azóta egy az egyben tud az író is valamit adni a közönségnek, még addig felvilágosodás előtt mindenki ugyanazt gondolta, vagy ugyanazt olvasta, és egyházi irodalom volt, amikor egy ilyen közösségformáló szerepe volt. Viszont ebben az új időben az irodalomnak talán egy ilyen új szerepe van, hogy egyetértesz egyel.
Okay. I was going to say we could leave it there.
That's
Nagyon olvasócentrikus a kérdés, az a bajom.
He thinks that the question is very reader-centric.
Az irodalom pedig írócentrikus.
And literature is writer-centric.
Do you think Kundera is reader-centered?
Hogy Kundera olvasócentrikus?
Okay. Because I think that he would argue that it feeds the writer in the same way, but we can leave that question.
Yes, it's a difficult question because there is a history of literature even before the Aufklärung. What? The Enlightenment. What?
Enlightenment?
Enlightenment.
Enlightenment.
Enlightenment. It is Aufklärung. I never heard this word. And I have learned. There is a history before that, and so the old Greeks started,
Sure.
and before that the Egyptians, and since the people, I think when the in the stone time, the Steinzeit, in the Stone Age, the people were sitting on the fires and were telling stories to each other. So that's also a kind of literature, and the search for God or for religion is also a part of the literature. And for example, when Bertolt Brecht was asked, "What's your favorite book?" he said the Bible, because maybe this is written in a great style. You never forget it. Literature is not only the telling of stories; it's in another way. It's a style. It's art. But you can speak hours and hours
Sure.
about this.
Sure.
It's very, very difficult. Yes, but that's.
I think the bestseller in those days was "I Killed the Bison."
Hogy a legjobb történet volt, az kőkorról beszélt, hogy már akkor is volt irodalom, és a legjobb sztori az, hogy megöltem a bölényt.
So let me shift gears a little bit, but using Kundera as a kind of lynch there, though, he speaks very sort of passionately about Europe. Part of the focus of these conversations is sort of the changing face of Europe. I wonder whether you find, either of you, that Europe is still a useful concept in this global world. I think I'm thinking about this partly because Obama has just been there and continued on his way to other parts of the world as effortlessly as he had been, he'd been in Berlin one morning, Baghdad the next day. So do you think about that idea? Does it have any sort of relevance in your own?
Tehát, hogy azt mondjuk, mint Kunderára visszatérve, hogy Kundera úgy gondolja, hogy Európa meg a változás nagyon fontos, hogy az európai irodalomban egyáltalán a változásnak a bemutatása, és hogy azt mondja, ebben a modern érában, tehát most, hogy gyakorlatilag például Obama is meglátotta Európát, egy nap Berlinben volt, másik nap Bagdadban, hogy gyakorlatilag szerintem azt kérdezi, hogy van-e Európának lényege az irodalomban, vagy tud-e neki adni valamit, hogy ez ilyen fontos. Érted?
Értem.
I'm waiting what he's...
Azt mondja, hogy vár rád.
Nem tudom, hogy mit tud adni Európa, nem tudom, hogy mit tud adni az irodalom, azt tudom, hogy nekem mire van szükségem, vagy próbálok rájönni, hogy miért van szükségem.
So he says he doesn't know what Europe can provide, or literature can provide. The only things he knows what he needs and why he needs literature for himself.
Én egyébként az optimista kisebbséghez tartozom, ami az irodalom jövőjét illeti.
He is part of the optimistic minority about the future of literature in general.
Tehát én azt gondolom, hogy amíg ez a faj, amit jobb hiány homo sapiensnek nevezünk, ez létezik, addig létezni fog irodalom. Azóta létezik, és addig létezni fog irodalom. És hogy ennek, tehát hogy az internet hogyan hat rá, vagy Obama európai látogatása hogyan hat rá, ez gyakorlatilag mind másodlagos ahhoz képest, hogy az emberi léleknek van egy olyan alapvető szükséglete, ami megteremti azt, amit irodalomnak nevezünk.
So he thinks that literature is a part of the human soul, and as long as there is such a thing as a Homo sapiens, there will be literature, and other things are secondary to it. Just as Obama's visit to Europe or the internet itself, he thinks what it is a need for a human soul to have literature.
Great.
Yes, you ask it about the idea
Of Europe, yeah, whether it's changed so much in the last 20 years.
I know,
yeah.
but I'm thinking about what for me or what is the idea of Europe? What is for what stands the old Europe? There a lot of good things come from the old Europe. A lot of philosophers and writers and politicians and so on and so forth. But also a lot of wars and terrorists. Sure. And it's what can you say? I think I have to spend some time in a little cellar and have to think about it, and then I come back. But I think I sometimes it's strange. I'm proud that I'm from Europe. I'm even proud that I'm from the middle of this Germany, because there is Martin Luther was living there. Mm-hmm. He is the father of the modern German language, and you have to take all the good. I know.
Yeah, sure.
Well, you know what I mean.
I do. I think that the larger sort of identity of a writer and how much that is bound to any particular geography is a singular choice, and so there's no good inevitable way of thinking about this. So I think at this point what I want to do is open this up to the floor to some questions. I've got a bunch more questions for you, but let's see what the audience wants to know. There's a microphone right there. I think Elizabeth is coming around with it.
Thank you very much. Is this on? You can hear me?
Nope, it's not on.
Okay, it is. Rob, a question relative to Mr. Attila. Interesting is, recently as yesterday, I must admit that one of my Ukrainian friends had to excuse himself to run home and take care of mother. And it seems that in the Eastern European community, even here in the United States, in current generations, that seems to be, that matriarchy, that European matriarchy seems to be part of the culture, part of Eastern European culture. In Tranquility, did Attila, basically, did Mr. Bartis intend to depict this as a tragedy, or did he intend to depict this as comedic? Because I can see both sides of it. I can see some humor to that passage from Tranquility, and on the other hand, I can see tragedy. The second question I have is, with Tranquility in particular, is from the feedback that he got, how satisfied is he that the English translation is a good representation of the flavor that he wanted to project?
Két kérdése van. Az első gyakorlatilag az, hogy úgy látja ő, hogy az ukrán rokonság révén is, hogy az anyának nagyon fontos szerepe van kelet-európai társadalmakban, és hogy sokkal inkább még a mostani generációban is ez egy központi szerepet játszik. Hogy a te regényedben az anya szerep és az anyának meg a fiúnak a viszonya, hogy te ezt egy tragédiaként írtad, vagy inkább ez egy részben egy komikus elemnek számít? Ez az első kérdés. A második kérdés pedig az, hogy mennyire vagy elégedett az angol fordítással, mennyire adja vissza azt, amilyennek te gondolod?
Hát a második kérdéssel kezdeném.
He's going to start with the second question to respond to that.
Akkor lennék elégedett az angol fordítással, ha most angolul tudnék válaszolni, tehát érteném pontosan az angol fordítást.
He would be perfectly happy with the English translation if he was to speak English now to you and respond to your. So he obviously can't fully appreciate the English translation.
Sajnos csak önökben bízhatom, önök tudják nekem megmondani, hogy milyen az angol fordítás.
You can tell me how good it is. Mit a többiek, ugye a közönségtől mit kaptál, hogy milyen válaszokat, vagy benyomást, hogy milyen a fordítás? Mit mondtak neked róla?
Hát úgy tűnik, hogy jó.
Positive responses.
Úgy tűnik, hogy jó. Ami az első kérdést illeti, hogy tragédia vagy komédia, hát ezt azért, tehát én nem venném a bátorságot, hogy ilyen élesen ketté válasszam ezt a két dolgot.
Regarding your first question, he's just not ready to really separate or take the effort to separate from tragedy to comedy. The way he depicted the mother-son relationship in the book.
Nagy ívben kerülném a közhelyeket, de hát ez két embernek vagy több embernek az életéről szól, és az élet az természetesen ugyanúgy tartalmaz tragikus pillanatokat, mint komikus pillanatokat.
So he doesn't want to be too profane about this, but obviously in any two persons relationship there's a complex emotion, so there are positive and negative sentiments to it.
És azt hiszem, hogy ha az egyik elemet kivesszük belőle, akkor a másik elem hiteltelenné válik.
And if you remove one of the components, the other one becomes worthless.
Chandler, yes, thank you.
I had a question for Clemens. Before I ask my question, I want to ask him to please promise this audience that he will wear the Red Sox jacket in New York. You know.
I promise. I promise this to you. No problem. I know about the rivals. The New York.
In many ways, it's quite similar. It's quite similar. I think there's some of the same angst.
I go there and all the night and all the day with this jacket. Through New York. Through the Bronx.
We have won the World Series in 2004 and 2007. They haven't
yes,
won
I know
since
the story.
1999. Good.
I know the book. It's written by Stuart Onan and Stephen King.
Yes. Faithful, you have it?
I read it.
Excellent.
I read it. I visited a reading in Leipzig. Stuart Onan came to Leipzig a few times, and so I bought this book in English. I read it in English.
He went to BU, Stuart Onan.
Stuart
Onan was a student here.
He was a Saul Bellow, Stuart Onan. Yes, Stuart Onan. I like his novel, The Snow Angel. I like this. But I think unfortunately he writes too much. But No, sorry, your question.
But I also have a question, and I ask this. I confess that I'm passing on a stereotype here. I studied in Bonn, when it was West Germany, and sort of in the shadow of Adenauer's impression of East Germany. What is it? Past the Ober, fängt an the Orient. And there was this real angst in West Germany about about Prussia, about what East German society was like. I think deeper than merely communism, but an angst about a Protestant society that to someone like Adenauer or the Rhineland Germans seemed somewhat anomic, seemed to be a society of individuals easily whipped up into a crowd. And I know this is a complete stereotype. I'm just wondering if any of that is true, and if any of that is represented in the account you give of this tension between these violent football crowds, the crowds easily whipped up into a mass.
Mikor Németországban élt, akkor látta, hogy az Adenauer Nyugat-Németország nem csak azért volt neki ellenszenves Kelet-Németország, mert szocialista volt, hanem mert egy protestáns, hogy hívják, ez Oroszország gyakorlatilag, hogy ott más volt a filozófia.
You think the East Germans could take over all the? No.
What the society is like? Is it that
Yes.
economic?
It's specific, I think, for the soccer. So in this story he read, and it continues and with more and more violence, and at the end the police. This chapter took place in 1990, and there are the old parts of the Eastern German police, and they did not know what to do, and they shoot into the crowd, and so one young guy is killed. This is historical, and this is a true story. And even today, there are big problems in East Germany with the violent football soccer crowds. Yes, also in the Western Germany, but for especially in the East Germany. I know it because all the soccer teams are playing in the lower leagues. This Germany Leipzig is in the 4th league, and there are other big Eastern Germany soccer teams. But a lot of people were thinking about it, why it is so, why there are these crowds, especially with young people, so around 20, between 20 or 15, even younger than 20. Why it is so? It is only the problems of the unemployment, only the social problems. And a lot of people are looking for answers, but there is this angst, you said, this fear. I think that years ago there was a lot of fear in the Western Germany. You can't not say fear, but Vorurteile. What? Prejudice. Prejudice. When they look in the east part of Germany, but I think now it gets better. But this violence in the soccer, in the lower soccer leagues, it's a problem. And yes, it's sometimes in Leipzig. It's 2 years ago. There was a big outburst of violence in a 6th league game, and it was like a civil war. It was unbelievable. With helicopters and policemen on horses and shootings, and it was unbelievable. It was in Europe. It was in television, but it's hard to find a reason of this.
Fine madness. Yes.
This is a question to Mr. Bartis, and essentially I would like to know, I'd like to know when he mentioned that his teacher, his first Hungarian teacher, expressed surprise at his good Hungarian. Could this have been also regarded as somewhat of a compliment in a sense, or did he feel that this reflected a basic rejection of him by the Hungarian Society of Hungary? That's one question, and if he were to answer this, I have one more question after that, but I'd like to hold that off so that he can answer this.
Are you going to repeat it in Hungarian, or do you want me to translate?
I can repeat it.
Why not?
If you want.
Szóval azt kérdezte gyakorlatilag, hogy amikor az első tanárod megkérdezte, hogy onnan beszélsz, hogy azt gondolod, hogy ezt egy bóknak vélted, vagy pedig az volt, hogy egyszerűen úgy kitaszította Magyarországnak.
Nem, ez egy egészen általános reflex volt. A Kádár rendszernek volt ez a sajátja, tehát semmilyen módon nem foglalkozni a határokon túli magyar kisebbséggel, nehogy a nacionalizmus, fasizmus, revizionizmus vágyával illessenek minket, és ezzel sikerült elérni azt, hogy gyakorlatilag a magyarországi magyarságnak alig volt fogalma arról az 5 millió magyarról, akik a környező országokban éltek.
So his answer is that he thinks that this reflects the general attitude of the Hungarians at a time. This is before the political changes, before '89, that the Hungarian regime, the government was sort of trying to make the impression that the less is known about the Hungarians living outside of Hungary, the better it is, because anything, if we bring up the issue, that would more reflect on our nationalism or chauvinism, which was not an acceptable attitude at a time that the Hungarian government wanted to represent to the world. And on top of that, what it led to, that basically Hungary has forgotten about the culture that it has outside of at its current boundaries, and how the people live, and then they are part of the ethnic Hungarian nation.
Természetesen volt kivétel, tehát szó nincs arról, hogy az egész magyar társadalom így működött volna, de sajnos a javarésze az így működött.
So obviously there were exceptions. There were people who were well aware of the Hungarians living outside of the country, but he says that it was a general attitude and that was portrayed in the country at the time.
No, if I may continue. In passing, I would like to comment on the mention of Transylvanian migrants, Transylvanian migrants of Hungarian nationality into Hungary, which came across as being black workers, which in an American context may be misunderstood. I think the Hungarian context actually regarded them not as black in a racial sense or in any racial kind of regard, but as a black market.
My mistake, I'm sorry.
Black market workers, sort of
exactly.
more equivalent to illegal immigrants.
Exactly.
No,
exactly.
The other question is, since the entry of Romania into European Union and the closer bonds and easier communication between the two countries, have these attitudes changed in Hungary, where you now live, with respect to the Hungarians of Transylvania? And that is my question. If you want, I can ask in Hungarian.
Please do it.
Hogy mióta a Románia is belépett az Európai Unióba, hogy megváltozott-e ez a magyar társadalom része, és a közlekedés könnyebbé vált, megváltozott-e a magyar társadalomnak a szemlélete az erdélyi magyarokról?
Most
Yeah, no, please.
Tehát az Európai Unió az természetesen nem tud csodát tenni, de valamennyire képes lefegyelmezni az indulatokat.
So the European Union cannot make wonders, but it can or miracles, but it can definitely somehow conserve some of the attitudes of violence.
Nagyon-nagyon sok minden változott az utóbbi években, ezt volt alkalmam megtapasztalni, mert elég sokat voltam Romániában, és most nem Erdélyre gondolok, a szülőföldemre, hanem a román vidékre, tehát Bukarestre, meg a többire.
So he has recently been back a few times in Romania, and he sees some of the changes, talking about also the Romanian parts of Romania where there is no Hungarian minority.
És hát azért hála jó Istennek szó nincsen arról, hogy a román értelmiségnek ne lenne egy olyan nagyon-nagyon erős réteg, amelyikkel ne lehetne beszélgetni. Van, hál' Istennek.
And then he's convinced there is a very the majority of the Romanian intellectuals that have a conversation with the Hungarians. So there is no doubt about that.
De hát azzal azért tisztába kell lennünk, hogy mindkét oldalon olyan mélyre gyökereznek a sebek, hogy ezeket egy felelőtlen politika bármikor föl tudja szakítani és ki tudja használni.
But it is also true that on both sides the wounds are so deep that at any point some irrelevant or indiscriminate political decision or government could change the attitude towards the two nations towards each other.
De ezzel már nagyon eltávolodtunk az irodalomtól.
But this is very far from literature.
Great. We have just time for one final question on as part of the official program. Then we'll have a chance to speak to each other informally. Rob, yes.
Yeah. I really like both of your writing. It's very not American. You write about really uncomfortable topics and very, very close and kind of almost celebrate a self-loathing. It's very difficult to translate that, but it's something I like in the work of Kutsi. I like in the work of the famous Japanese writer, Mishima. And there's a very uncomfortable but very closely felt sensibility. It's like home cooking for me. Is that something? I'm a poet, and a lot of my family's from Eastern Europe. But it's not so much a question, but am I being too careful with this, in the sense that this ability to try and go deeply into a very uncomfortable situation and really explore the hell out of it? Is that something that you even notice, or is that just what you're doing? Because we don't do it here. It's not part of our literature. We like atmospherics. We like, for the most part, I'm generalizing, and we like things that are new and different, and nothing like the kinds of things you guys are exploring.
Yeah. Do you want to take that?
But that's American. That is American. That's the way the American literature for me works. You go to the misfits. You go to situations where people are not in comfort situations. You know what I mean? I think that's the way some of American, not all, the American literature is. There are many Strömungen. Directions, yes, streams. But I think it's an international idea of going into an uncomfort situation where people are in troubles, where people have some problems of every nature, of social problems or psychological problems or problems with the family or so. And I think this is I could find it in the American literature too. And I think every national literature should go deep into their own problems, and this make it international. So I say.
Great. Attila, last word to you.
Attila, mondani valamit?
Tehát én csak olyan kérdéseket teszek föl, amelyeket fölteszek a magam számára is.
So in his writings, he's basing questions, the same questions that he would ask himself.
És hogyha vannak válaszaim ezekre a kérdésekre, akkor az Isten áldása, ha nincsenek, akkor nagyon nagy bajban vagyok ideig, óráig.
And if he has an answer, that's God's blessing, and if he doesn't, then he's in big trouble.
Eszem ágába sincs senkit provokálni.
I don't want to provoke anyone.
Így gondolkodom.
This is how I think.
It's a great note on which to end this part of the conversation, a formal part, but we'll continue outside informally. Thank you very much.
Folytatjátok.